know is missing. And by the time you realize the gap, it might already be too late. Ignorance doesn't operate in isolation. It compounds exponentially, much like the psychological phenomenon of cascading cognitive failures. When you lack awareness of a threat, you don't simply miss one piece of information, you miss the entire architecture of decision-making that could protect you. This is the danger zone where the mind operates most vulnerably. Consider the neuroscience. Your brain's threat detection system relies on pattern recognition built from accumulated knowledge. Without foundational awareness, these neural pathways never activate. You move through your environment in a state of false confidence, what psychologists call illusory superiority, the conviction that you understand far more than you actually do. This cognitive bias becomes lethal when applied to matters of genuine consequence. The multiplication effect emerges because ignorance doesn't just affect one decision, it cascades through every subsequent choice. A single gap in understanding becomes the lens through which you interpret all future information. Your amygdala processes perceived safety based on incomplete data, triggering dopamine responses that reinforce false certainty. You feel secure precisely because you cannot perceive the danger. What makes this exponential rather than linear is psychological momentum. Once your mind settles into a belief structure, confirmation bias locks it in place. You selectively absorb information that supports your existing understanding while unconsciously filtering out contradictory evidence. Each day, each decision reinforced by this flawed foundation strengthens the neural pathways of misconception. The gap doesn't merely widen, it becomes self-perpetuating, self-reinforcing, virtually invisible to the consciousness it's slowly undermining. The truly dangerous knowledge gaps are those you don't know exist. They operate in the blind spot where your confidence remains highest and your vigilance lowest. This is where risk multiplies silently, where the human psychological architecture becomes not our greatest asset, but our most profound vulnerability. Understanding this mechanism is the first step toward genuine protection. The moment you stop learning is the precise instant your psychological architecture begins its inevitable decline. This isn't metaphorical, it's neurobiological. Your brain, an organ that evolved through constant adaptation, experiences genuine atrophy when deprived of novel stimuli and intellectual challenge. The neural pathways that kept you sharp begin their slow dissolution, a process neuroscientists call pruning, where unused synaptic connections literally die. What makes this particularly insidious is that you won't feel yourself becoming obsolete. The mind lacks the metacognitive awareness to perceive its own deterioration in real time. This creates a dangerous psychological paradox. The moment you stop learning, your capacity to recognize this stagnation diminishes proportionally. You experience what feels like stability while experiencing actual decline. Your confidence remains artificially inflated even as your competence erodes beneath the surface. The psychological cost extends beyond cognition into identity itself. Learning is fundamentally how humans construct meaning, purpose, and relevance. When you cease this process, you don't simply lose information. You lose your sense of forward momentum, of evolutionary progression. The human psyche requires growth the way the body requires oxygen. Without it, a subtle but pervasive depression emerges, what existential psychologists recognize as the anxiety of stagnation disguised as contentment. In our rapidly evolving world, obsolescence accelerates exponentially. The knowledge that sustains you today becomes insufficient tomorrow. Your competitors, your environment, your own potential, all continue evolving whether you do or not. The gap widens daily. Your expertise becomes a liability if it hardens into rigid patterns rather than fluid adaptation. The psychological truth is stark. Survival in the modern world demands continuous cognitive renewal. The moment you stop learning, you don't merely pause, you begin regressing. Every neuron not engaged in novel thought is a synapse surrendering to entropy. Your relevance, your competence, your very mental vitality depend on perpetual engagement with the unknown. Stagnation isn't rest, it's slow psychological extinction. Information asymmetry operates as one of the most potent psychological weapons in human interaction, though few recognize it as such. When one party possesses knowledge the other lacks, an invisible power dynamic crystallizes instantly. The informed individual gains what psychologists term cognitive dominance, a psychological advantage that translates into behavioral control before a single conscious decision is made. This manifests through multiple psychological mechanisms operating simultaneously. The person with superior information experiences enhanced confidence, what we observe in increased vocal authority and decisive body language. Conversely, the information-disadvantaged party unconsciously defers, their uncertainty triggering submissive neural patterns. This isn't choice, it's automatic psychological response hardwired into our social hierarchy. Detection systems. The neuroscience reveals something darker. Knowledge confers not just advantage but control over narrative construction itself. Those who control information shape how others interpret reality. They determine which facts become salient, which remain invisible. This is psychological architecture at its most fundamental level. The uninformed person doesn't simply lack data, they lack the very framework through which to question the narrative being presented to them. What elevates this from mere advantage to existential threat is the psychological illusion of equality it maintains. The information-advantaged party presents their curated reality as objective truth, while the disadvantaged party, lacking comparative knowledge, accepts this construction as reality itself. No coercion is necessary, no force is required. The psychological submission is voluntary, unconscious, complete. History demonstrates this repeatedly. Those who controlled information controlled empires. Those who understood this principle shaped civilizations. In personal domains, professional contexts, and institutional frameworks, information asymmetry determines outcomes before competition begins. The psychological reality is unforgiving. Those who understand this principle and weaponize it control not just decisions, but the very consciousness of those around them. Information isn't merely power, it's the ultimate psychological leverage, the invisible hand that moves the visible world. The gap between perceived knowledge and actual knowledge is where human catastrophe incubates, undetected and accelerating. Psychologists call this the Dunning-Kruger effect, a cognitive phenomenon so profound it restructures how we understand human judgment itself. Those who know the least about a subject often display the highest confidence in their understanding, while those with genuine expertise remain appropriately cautious. This inversion of competence and confidence creates a psychological blind spot of lethal proportions. What makes this particularly devastating is the neurological architecture behind it. Your brain doesn't process ignorance, it processes confidence. When you lack knowledge in a domain, your mind doesn't generate anxiety proportional to the gap. Instead, it generates false certainty. The neural pathways that would normally trigger warning signals remain dormant because they require foundational knowledge to activate. You cannot fear what you cannot conceive of as dangerous. This psychological trap operates most lethally in high-stakes domains where the consequences are delayed or invisible. Your brain evolved for immediate feedback. When you touch fire, you feel pain instantly. But in complex systems, health decisions, financial investments, institutional choices, the feedback loop stretches across months or years. By the time reality reveals your ignorance, the cascade of poor decisions has already begun its destructive work. The tragedy deepens through psychological momentum. Once your mind commits to a belief about your competence, confirmation bias locks it into place. You selectively perceive evidence supporting your self-assessment while filtering out contradictory data. Each day reinforces the illusion. Your identity becomes invested in maintaining this constructed narrative of understanding, making genuine learning psychologically threatening rather than appealing. The most dangerous knowledge gaps are those you're completely unaware of. The unknown unknowns operating in your psychological blind spot. These aren't abstract concerns. They're active threats reshaping your life trajectory in real time. The distance between what you believe you know and what you actually know is measured in consequences. Consequences you won't recognize until they've already fundamentally altered your existence. Awareness of this gap is itself the first crucial step toward genuine understanding and protection. The knowledge gap that kills isn't the one you're aware of. It's the one operating in the darkness of your own blind spot, silently reshaping your destiny while you remain convinced you understand the terrain. Every decision you make today is built on foundations you haven't examined. Every certainty you carry contains hidden cracks, and by the time reality reveals what you didn't know, the architecture of your life has already begun its collapse. The question isn't whether a knowledge gap exists within you, it's whether you have the psychological courage to seek it before it seeks you.